So today I want to talk to you about guilty pleasures. That's classic car guilty pleasures. Those cars that actually you secretly love, but other people might think they're just a little bit naff. And I'm going to be sharing with you my top 3, and I'd like you to also get involved and let us know what your top 3 classic car guilty pleasures would be. Now let's start with my number 3 classic car guilty pleasure. And this car is known as being a bit of a Marmite car. You either love it or you absolutely hate it. What is it? Well, I'm all about the styling of a car because I'll be honest with you, I know nothing about engines. That's not my thing, not my bag, never has been. And the reason I started this channel is to talk about classic cars, the story of classic cars, not necessarily how the engines work. That's other people do that. I like the aesthetics of cars, the shapes of them, how they look. And that's why when I was a teenager, I used to go out on my bike to all the car dealers and collect the car brochures. And I had stacks of these things, hundreds of them. My mum eventually persuaded me to burn them all, which I did, and I wish I hadn't done that now. So for me, it's all about the shapes, and that's what makes classic cars so interesting to talk about because they're all so different. You knew what brands were what, but now everything seems to look the same. SUVs absolutely everywhere, and nothing kind of individual anymore. I like the individuality of these classic cars. So my number 3 choice is a car that you might not say is a classic car, but they were built over 20 years ago now, so I think they will count. It's a car that went back to the style of the 1950s, and I'm talking about, of course, the PT Cruiser. Don't shout at the screen. I love the shape of this car, the whole throwback to sort of 1950s look. And so eventually I bought one. I went one step further too. I went and bought the convertible version, which some people have said looks like a skip. Launched in April 2000, the PT Cruiser led to waiting lists of nearly a year, with some PTs changing hands twice their original selling price. The car started off as a Plymouth Badge Pronto concept car and was shown to the public in 1997. The car had bold styling from the 1920s and 30s through to the 1950s and 60s hot rods. It became clear very soon that these cars were easily adaptable by adding chrome and different designs. There were some special factory editions as well, including the Woody package, the Chrysler PT Street Cruise 66 edition, and the 2009 Dream Cruiser 5. But I had a lot of fun in it. People would come up to me and say, "Hey, I love your car, I like the look of it, I love the colour." It had this lovely striking blue colour. And yes, inside it was plasticky, and with the roof off, it did shake a little bit on the steering. It certainly wasn't perfect. It was a 2 litre and it was very juicy. It didn't last very long, the fuel. He was always refilling it. So yeah, it was a talking point. I quite enjoyed that, having something maybe a bit different. And there are a lot of them around, you know. At one point there was a waiting list to get these cars when they were first released. People were queuing up to get them. The hardtop version looked a bit like a hearse on the back, but they certainly had a fantastic following at one time until the steam kind of ran out of it in the end, I guess. But at least with Chrysler you could say that they at least took the bull by the horns and actually created something that looked a bit different rather than the same boring cars that we get today. So there's number 3 on my list, the PT Cruiser. So let me know what your thoughts are on the PT Cruiser, and let us know what your top 3 guilty pleasure cars would be. What would you have as your top 3 cars that you probably wouldn't normally tell people, but secretly you love these cars? So my number 3, the PT Cruiser convertible. Right, it's time to reveal my number 2 choice. And strangely enough, it's another Chrysler. Yeah, it's a bit strange really. I hadn't thought about that until afterwards. Hang on, there's 2 Chryslers here, but it didn't mean to be, it's just the way it's worked out. But the second of my choice is the Chrysler 180 2 litre. Now this is an interesting car, this, because they're not particularly well known or regarded. But my father had one, back in the early 1980s. And he had the 2-litre automatic. It was the first automatic car I'd ever driven, and it was great. And we used to drive down to France in this particular car for holidays, that type of thing. And it's got an interesting story because Chrysler bought out the Roots car company, and they also bought out Simca as well. And it's kind of like an English-French combination, if you know what I mean. And they looked like an Avenger, had that styling to it. And they were quite nicely made, to be honest with you. They were quite comfortable inside. They looked a bit kind of American, I think, the dashboard and the interior, but they were quite plush. But obviously they didn't compare to sort of Cortinas or Granadas or those kinds of cars, but they were quite a nice looking car. The front of it looked a bit old-fashioned. It also reminded me of a Vauxhall Viva a little bit at the front of it as well. But we really used to enjoy it. We used to go everywhere in it. It was a fun car to have. And so I've got a real kind of an affection for this car. The Chrysler 180 had a unique background, emerging from 2 separate development programs by the Roots Group in the UK and Simca in France. In the mid-1960s, Roots aimed to replace the Humber Hawk Imperial range, tasking Ron Axe, their styling chief, to design a new Humber by the end of the decade. The approved design resembled a larger Hillman Avenger, known today as the Chrysler 180. In France, from July 1979, the car was sold as the Talbot Simca 2-litre until the end of 1980, though production ended in 1979 with 288,294 units built. The 180 and 2-litre models were considered failures despite steady sales. But even this was overshadowed by the Talbot Tagora, the car that replaced it. I think they're very rare now. I don't think you see many of these about. In fact, I haven't seen one for years and years. I don't know of anyone who's got one even. So if you've got one, please share a picture of it. I'd love to see it and see what your one's like. If you have one, please let us know about it. Is it another car that maybe you think, well, actually, yeah, it's quite a nice car, really. Let us know about it. Put it in the comments below. And don't forget to share your top 3 of your guilty pleasure classic car. And finally, let's move on to my number 1 classic car guilty pleasure. Now, this car I first saw when I was about 12, 13. And the man at the end of my road had one of these, and I'd go to school with my mates and we'd see this car and we were like really, really into it. This is amazing, this car. And the thing that really grabbed us about this car was the fact that the headlights came out through the bonnet. So he'd come out of his house and then he'd get the car started up and he'd put the headlights and up would come the bonnet headlights. And of course I'm talking about the TR7. And I thought this car was incredibly cool at the time. And I remember seeing him at the weekend and he was out washing his car. And I said, oh, can you please put your headlights on? And he duly responded, jumped in the car and put the headlights up, and up they went. Oh, that's really cool. Headlights that come out the bonnet. I thought this was like space age and really different. And I thought it was a really cool car. And of course, the car wasn't always looked as being a cool car at the beginning when it first came out. Over 200 improvements were made on the car during its lifetime. And those headlights, they're famously, when they would get wet in the rain, they wouldn't always, one would come up and then sometimes they wouldn't come up at all. So things like that had to be fixed. It wasn't a soft top to start with either. It was very much aimed at the US market. The car featured a distinctive wedge shape, advertised as the shape of things to come, with a curved line from the door to the rear, designed by Harris Mann, who also created the Leyland Princess. It was codenamed the Bullet during development. It measured 160 inches long, 66 inches wide, with an 85-inch wheelbase. There's so much to talk about when it comes to classic car guilty pleasures. What one person loves, another person hates. So it's a real big topic. Let us know in the comments below what you think are your classic guilty pleasures. Which ones do you love? Which ones do you hate? We'd love to hear about it. Don't forget, as always, to make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Make sure you like and make sure you share. But if you like stories about classic cars, then make sure you watch this video.